This is Gemara Avodah Zarah Daf Mem Vav, and we're holding Mem Vav Amud Aleph for about 8 lines from the bottom. The first one line is a kol ein kites, kol ein kites, and we just finished the discussion which revolved around Avodah Zarahs attached to the ground, starting with the previous Mishnah, in which people who served mountains and the like, whether they become aser, do the trees become aser, or only that which is attached to them, the kasha from Ashira, etc. Says the Gemara, Tani Tana Kamei Rav Sheshis. Ha'akom ha'ivdin es aharim es agvais hein mutarem va'ivdeim es zaram es yirakois ves ha'yirakois. Says Rav Yosef, Goyim that worship mountains and hills, the mountain hills are mutter. Va'ivdeim b'sayif, those that worship them, get killed by the sword. If they worship grains and vegetables, hein, the grains and vegetables are asurin. Va'ivdeim, and those who worship them are b'sayif, they get killed by the sword. So the same din, the chilik between the item itself being aser, and those that worship them, the misa that they're chayiv. Amar lei, says the Gemara, Rav Sheshes said, Amar lechamani, whom are you holding like? Who is the opinion that holds of this chilik, that by mountains, excuse me, I didn't spell this out properly. By mountains and gvais, they're mutter, they can't become aser. But Yerakis and Zrayim, they could become aser. So whom is this? Of course, this goes back to our Mishnah. This was yesterday's daf. This is Rav Yesi Rav Yehudi, Damar Ilon Shanatul B'Sleif Avdu. If you planted something and then it is worshipped, aser. It's going to be aser, so it'll be the same din over here. Ask the Gemara, but if this is true, why are we saying that the case has to be talking about one? It was planted not as Avodah Zarah. Then they changed their mind to Avodah Zarah, and then it fits the bin of Rav Yehuda. Frag the Gemara, why don't we just say we're talking about something that was planted originally for Avodah Zarah, and it's a sheet of the Rabbanan. Explains the Gemara, caused the whole case, equated it to a mountain. Wasn't planted originally for this. It was not planted originally for this purpose. And therefore we have a brisa corroborating the opinion of Rav Yosi Berebi Yehuda. Says the Gemara, Itmar, smack in middle of the narrow lines of Mem Vav Amud Aleph. The first word of the line is Natay Mitzchil Lekach. Says the Gemara, Avnei Har Shenidaldilai, the stones that were dislodged from the mountain. What mountain? This mountain that we've been discussing, this mountain that was worshipped. B'nei Rav Chiya v'Rav Yochanan Chadamar Asurais, the stones are aser, Chadamar Mutaris. My time and mandamar Mutaris. Kehar Mahar Shein by Tvisis. Yeah, the mountain itself you cannot grab hold to. Adam Umotar Av Honey Shein Man Tvisis Yad Adam Umutar. So to these items, the stones, they're not affected by man, therefore they are mutter. And the reason is it was an item which is inherently part of a mountain. It's not called something that I affected. But ask the Gemara, wait, if this is true, Malahar. Ask the Gemara, Malahar Shekin Bachobar. But the mountain itself is attached. The stones are not mechubar, so why should the stone get a din of the mountain? Explains the Gemara, an animal is going to prove to you that even though it's not attached to the ground, and even though, an animal is not attached, and it's mutter after it's going to be worshipped. So what do we see? We see that not only are mountains mutter. Again, we started off with the contrast between a mountain and between vegetation. Vegetation is aser when it's worshipped. A mountain is not. We're now discussing the stones. So you want to say that the stones are going to be similar to the mountain, they're going to be mutter. Frag the Gemara, wait, a mountain is mechuber, the stone is not. And for the Gemara, no. Who says mechuber is the characteristic? We find that a behema that was worshipped is mutter, even though it's not mechuber. Says Gemara, what's your ayah? Ma'ale behemish kin balach chayim. A behemoths are alive, so you can't bring raya from it. Says the Gemara, a mountain will prove you that a mountain is not alive, and it's mutter ba'na. So what's the tzara shava shebehen she'ein ban tvisis yidei adam? So we see this din of tvisis yidei adam. They're items that are not affected by human intervention, umutter, avkol, and that's going to include our stone, she'ein ban tvisis yidei adam, umutter. Frag the Gemara, not so quickly. They're not changed from the way that God originally created them. Whereas the stone it was part of a mountain, and now it's ripped, now it's broken off. Says the Gemara, so says the Gemara, let's learn from a Balmum and from a mountain. A Balmum is not in its original state, and yet it's going to be mutter. So we see tfisis yad, we'll keep the item to be mutter. V'inanmi b'behema tama, a complete, unblemished animal, ume'ilan yavesh, and from a withered tree. So from the two of them, we're going to learn that indeed the halacha of our stones is going to be that they will be mutter. That's all according to the first shita. Again, when we started today, we brought in this price of Rav Sheshes, and we said, what's the story with the stones? So said the Gemara, we proved that price was like Rav Yehuda. We moved on and we said, what's the story with the Evan Shenedaldalu? We said it's a machlekes b'nei Rav Chia and Rav Yechon. One says aser, one says mutter. So we just went through the lengthy explanation of the mandarma that says it's mutter. Now says the Gemara manda aser. According to the Bindi, says the stones are aser. Ilachi k'sev shakis tishaksenu v'sayif titzavenu. You shall surely loathe it and abhor it. V'aval de asya medina latira. Even though we'll see that from the contrast, from the comparison, that perhaps it will be mutter regarding Avodah Zarah. Loi tasya, don't say such an analogy, and therefore the stones are going to be aser. So we have this machlekes of Yechon and Bnei Rav Chia. What is the status of an Evan Shenedaldalu? Whether it will be aser, whether it will be mutter. But obviously, as always, we don't know which shita holds which. So says the Gemara, this time I'll bring you a raya. Bnei Rav Chia disharu bnei Chizkiya. Bnei Rav Chia disharu. Why? The boy Chizkiya. Because Chizkiya asked, Zokav beyola l'shachvo islam out. If one stood an egg upright in order to bow to it, what is halacha? Is the egg aser? Because alta daitach. One who said that in order to bow to it, but he did indeed bow to it. We thought the shayla was, is the act of standing up the egg considered a maisa or not? But we think if they didn't actually stand it up, then it certainly will not become aser. Why? Because by worshipping the egg, it's ein ban tfisis yad. It's not affected by a person. We see from here that Bnei Rav Chia disharu. They're going to be of the opinion that it all has to do with the tfisis yad, and therefore it's going to be mutter. Says, and of course, Rav Yechon will be the one that says aser. The third white line says the Gemara Bnei Rav Chia daser. Because we see from that case the diak is incorrect. If you bow to it, even if you don't stand it up, it's going to be aser. You didn't end up bowing down to it, but we're talking about the act of standing up the egg for the purpose of Avodah Zarah. Uleman. Ileman damar Avodah Zarah shall Yisrael asura miyad. Asura. Ileman damar tetzaved haloi palchu. According to the other opinion that says, no, it's only aser once you actually worship the item, then it'll be mutter. Why? Because it wasn't worshipped. So why? What would the shayla, what would the bayir of Chizkiya be? Says the Gemara, 5 lines to the bottom. And then that's her shayla. Ki adam Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Yid stands up a brick to worship it, and then he doesn't, what's halacha asura? So what is Chizkiya Shaila? Leveino de minkar zekifasa. Do we say that a stone, a brick, it's minkar, it's recognizable, you're active standing it up, avobei alayah, and therefore obey will be mutter adam alayshna. That was the Shaila. The Gemara ends. We're gonna have to wait for Eliyahu and Avi to answer up this Shaila. Says the Gemara on the last line, if one bows down to a mountain, Avana Ma'u Mizbeach, can one take out the stones and use it for a Mizbeach? We just finished saying that the stones can be mutter. But what about using it for a Mizbeach? And this, of course, comes off of the fact that we just learned a moment ago, that when it comes to a Behema, even though the Behema was worshipped, the Behema can still be mutter. Le Karban. Says the Gemara, what's the Shaila? On the top of Memvav and Beis, Yishnevan Mechaber Eitzel Gavaya, or Ein Never Mechaber Eitzel Gavaya. The Shaila is, does the Isser of a worshipped item make something Asr to as a carbon? Or Ein Never Mechaber? Or do we say that something which is worshipped does not Asr because it's attached to the ground? Meaning, does this Yisod, that something like a har doesn't become Asr, does it even not become Asr that you can use it as part of a Mizbeach or not? So articulates the Gemara, would become Asr. Carbon ki carbon damu. Then you can ask things used for a carbon, do they have the same thing as a carbon or not? So Amar Rava or I lie or not. So on the tzad that only the mountain wouldn't become Asr, but you would not be allowed to be used as a Mizbeach itself. The Gemara wants to know, machshirei carbon, things used as a preparation for a carbon, will have the same din as the carbon or not. So Amar Rava, says Rava, Kalva Chaimer. Uma esnan shemuter betalish lehedyit, asr b'mechaber. If we have an esnan in its own is mizaneh, and he pays the zayna with an animal, that payment is aser. That payment halacha is bitalush. If it's detached to the ground, an ordinary person can get benefit. But ligvayam, it's going to be aser. Why? Excuse me. In both cases, nevad she'aser bitalush. Lahedyet, something that is worshipped, which to a hedyet is aser. Einoi den she'aser b'mechaber legavayas. The Gemara wants to prove from Esther and Zaina that the item should be aser. These avanim should be aser to be used as a machshiri carbon. Similar to we see the esnan is aser as a carbon. Or maybe not, or the opposite. Maybe you'll tell me something that was worshipped, something that was utilized in Avodah Zarah, when it's detached, it's aser. When it's attached, it's mutar b'mechaber legavaya. How do I know shenemar aleihem alaharim aleihem? So it's a mutter, the mountain itself. So therefore, esnan shamutar b'talus hadid and then shamutar b'mechaber legavaya. So says the Gemara, maybe I'll tell you the exact opposite. But if you're going to tell me Beis Hashem lekecha mi baile lechatanya. But if you're going to tell me you want him to have a Beis Hashem lekecha, that what bias, the base, the house of Hashem, your God, should show us that this item cannot be used for such. Then mi baile lechatanya. I'll ask you from the following brisa that says, Beis Hashem lekecha. The rabbis as harikuyim either comes to exclude a para, or does it come to the rabbis, or does it come to include as a rikuyim the beaten plate of coal that was used to decorate the kodesh hakadosh? So Amar lei Rav Huna, Rav responds, Ana kamina lachomra v'atamr lekula. Kul v'chumra, if we have a shayla, which way to go? L'chumra parchinan. So Amalei Rav Papa responds, but what do you mean? Your side is wrong. When it comes to sprinkling the Pesach, the Pliga of Lazar, Akiva, the Rav Lazar Savar, Lachamra, Vakamachayv, the Legvavra, Kiva the Kula, Butter, Kabarach, Kiva the Kula, Titanan, Isha, Kiva, Ichila, Vama, Zaya, Shimisham, Shvos, Eino Decha, Shabish, Chidishi, Daraisel, Kolshkin. And says the Gemara, so we see over there that we don't always necessarily go le chumrah. Says the Gemara, no, because Halsam Rav Elazar Gamrei v'Yarkele Talmuda. He had a Gemara. He had a Yalach LeMoshe Misinai. He had his own din, excuse me, and therefore v'Yarkele Talmuda, and he didn't know the teaching. Don't. Says Rabbi, do not deny at the moment of din what you taught me. So says the Gemara, we cannot prove from this case, and therefore we see Rabbi Kiva learned out this din from Rav Elazar. Kiva's Kavachaymer was only there to remind Rav Elazar, and therefore we can't learn anything from it. Therefore the Gemara falls off of this kasha. We'll stop over here. We'll pick it up from the Shel of Rabbi Baruch Chama the next year. Amir Tzah Hashem.